Well, the Brazilian government has made a new proposal of a fund to ensure rainforest protection. So right now we have Red Plus, which is supposed to protect from forest loss from deforestation. But once those forests are protected, there's actually currently no mechanism to sustainably protect those forests going forward. So this is where this new proposal comes in from the Brazilian government, which is called the TFFF, the Tropical Forest Forever Facility, and it's supposed to compensate people for protecting forests which aren't under threat anymore. So after deforestation or stopping deforestation, what comes then? And that's where this proposal comes in, and it's a proposal which essentially it's supposed to operate like a fund. So investors pay in, and these investors can be private sector, can be donors, philanthropy, but it's also going to be governments. That's very, very important. And they're going to put up, the aim is around 125 billion US dollars, and this is going to be invested in emerging market debt. Then with the revenues, the investors, of course, will be paid a return, and people protecting forests will also be paid approximately $4 per hectare, and that's how it's supposed to work, essentially.
Of course. There are many concerns regarding this proposal. I think it's important to say, first of all, that there's this whole idea now that it's a Brazilian proposal, and obviously it's the Brazilian government that has been leading the process. But we believe that there is a political use of this image of a southern government proposing such an important mechanism as they're calling it, when in fact there are other actors very much involved in the construction, in the whole, in the conceptual framework of the facility, and these same actors will also be responsible for the governance of the fund. One of the main actors that concern us is the World Bank. No, a colonial institution that has been responsible for so many policies that have led, including to many problems, including the climate crisis. So this is the first thing that concerns us. The other is mainly the idea that we can protect our forests from using resources that come from speculation, that the origins of the funds will come from the financial market, the same financial market that has been responsible for the climate crisis. So we're talking about the interest of banks as Bank of America and Barclays, banks which have been involved in funding companies related to agribusiness or mining that have led to so many violations, human rights violations, environmental rights violations in our countries. So the other concern, in general, the facility, as well as many other mechanisms that have been constructed with this idea of blended finance, concern us because it's based on a narrative that the state is inefficient, that the state has no resources, that the climate emergency requires the role of the private actors, and that the same actors that have caused all the problems are now going to be the saviors of a problem which they themselves caused. So it just leads to an intensification of the financialization of policies, no, especially the climate policy, and policies that lead to violations in the territory. So we don't see this as an alternative, neither to the carbon market, nor to red, nor to any kind of financing in any source. A mechanism that will lead to more dependence, to indebtedness, and this in the name of protecting the forest and benefiting the community. So it concerns us in various aspects.
The current inception is just relating to tropical forests. Obviously, if it's a success, it could be extended to other biomes, other biospheres, other ecological systems. But it's just as Fabrina explained. I mean, it's always a dangerous path putting a value on natural ecosystems, because the question is then, of course, say this fund collapses due to any form of crisis. Emerging market debt is susceptible to political instability, to currency depreciation, to debt defaults, all the things that we've seen over the last 20 or 30 years. And then, of course, if that happens, first of all, the problem is, the private investors are the ones who are bailed out. It's a government-backed, public money-backed risk that these private investors are taking. So I think there are real ethical problems with that. And then the other one, of course, is if you put a value on nature, what happens when that financial value depreciates? What happens to the forests if this fund collapses? So I think it's really important to sort of see this as what it is, because the global north countries are legally obliged to provide global south countries with climate finance, and they've been refusing to do this for years and years. And this sort of narrative that there's no money to fund this, that's a really dangerous narrative, because we've seen over the past couple of years specifically the kind of global issues for which money can be raised very quickly. This fund is sort of an extenuation of that narrative, saying we can't actually provide finance in the way it should be provided. Let's try this blended finance tool, which has very serious implications.
But I also think that the question you put forward raises an important issue that many social movements and communities from other biomes are denouncing in general. This excessive focus on the Amazon neglects all the deforestation related to other biomes. And regarding this, I think it's also because it's a narrative tool. It's a big propaganda. No, it's an important strategy to talk about these funds and to discuss the Amazon, no, as responsible for saving the world from climate change, as a way to make us ignore the real roots of the main problems that we're facing. So if we're here discussing a fund, now a new facility that the Brazilian government is making so many promises, and that 20% of the funds will go to communities and indigenous people, and in the meanwhile we're not talking about the policies that the state has resources to fund agribusiness, to apply subsidies to oil and to agribusiness and to other companies. And we're not talking about the need to protect indigenous territories and agrarian reform and other policies, education and health policies that are so much needed to guarantee rights. So it's also a way of pushing our focus to something else, so that we ignored the real roots of climate change and all the other crises that we're facing. Because it's not an issue of mobilizing private resources to combat climate change. That's not what we're talking about, really. We need to financialize our policies in general. We need to push these private actors and the financial capital away from our policies, that are causing so many problems and reducing the capacity and the will of the state to guarantee rights in general. So I think it's also a propaganda instrument to say that something is actually being done. And when we look at the root causes of climate change, no one is addressing them, no one is attacking them. The drivers of deforestation continue to act as if nothing is going on. So it's also, I think, a way of taking our attention to the real problems and real causes of climate change.
Yeah, I mean, I think with every COP we've seen in the past, every host country, every presidency wants to present a flagship outcome, a flagship policy that has been achieved. And I think in the case of Brazil, they are focusing on the TFFF as the big success, the reason why all of this was worth it. And obviously, you know, in the context of Brazil, tropical rainforests play a hugely important role. But maybe you could say a bit more about how the Brazilian sort of civil society is seeing this, and how responses from Brazil to this initiative are being shaped.
Where to begin? First, I think it's important to recognize that we've just come out of an extreme right government that was responsible for dismantling many of our policies, including those policies related to climate change. You know, and a liberal authoritarian government that has denied the existence of climate change. So the return of Lula, let's say, to the government comes in this context, you know, of a dismantling of policies and of the way we look at problems and the way we look at climate change, and in a context of a lot of violence in different territories. So it's important to recognize the context in which the Lula government in this period has come into power. Having said that, you know, I totally agree that it's important to come out of these events, you know, with a big victory, in a context where half of our public budget goes to paying debts, where our corporations make policies. You know? They dominate the executive, they dominate the legislative, they dominate our legal system. They make policies in this country. We have a long history of a very strong political and economic elite related to international capitalism, so which leaves little political room to support the policies based on which Lula won the government. No? So we're talking about, you know, political reform, agrarian reform, and all the policies that we were promised that would actually take place. So this complicates a lot of the political position. And the relation that the government has with a lot of organizations and social movements also complicates things, because it's again in a context where it's as if we have no alternative, as if, you know, the world is going to end because of climate change, so technology and the market is going to save us from all of the problems that we have caused. So on the one hand, it's as if there's no turning back. It's as if, you know, the global treaties have already been signed. You know, the Paris Agreement has already been signed. So energy transition will take place. The carbon market will take place. You know, financialization is already a reality. There's no turning back. So it's as if we can't do any different than what we have. And on the other hand, the construction of the idea that the market and technological fixes will be enough to take us out of this big hole that we've caved for ourselves. So it's actually incredible that in this whole situation we have so much support for a fund, a facility which is based on the very same actors that cause the problems that we're facing, and this is very worrying. So, but also because of the strategy of promising support for the communities, for recognizing that they are guardians of the forest, for promising 20% of the resources that the facility now has that are going to go directly to the community and to these indigenous people. So all of these promises are also a strategy to stop criticism, no, and to gain support. But when we go deeper into this promise, we see what 20% is this. The resources that are being promised are nothing compared to what is being needed. There are actually arguments that that we can use to affirm that 20% is not going to these indigenous peoples and community. They're not going directly to them. In a context where we've seen 20 years of red plus, no, of other carbon markets mechanism that have shown just the promise that resources will reach these communities and these organizations and indigenous and traditional people is not enough to avoid territorial conflicts, to avoid the advancement into these territories. No? The lack of consultation and the lack of mechanisms that will guarantee a minimum social control over a facility, such a big facility, such as the this one that we're talking about, leads us to believe that the resources will not reach the communities, and if they do, they will not be enough to avoid conflicts. They will not be enough to avoid dispute. On the contrary, we believe that it will be a source of violating self-determination, of violating their autonomy, and of violating their right to decide how they should live in their own territories. I think, David, what you said yesterday about reparations is something, it's fundamental, no? The idea that we don't need to mobilize, let's say in the other sense, that what we need is not another financial speculative mechanism, but what we need is reparations, no, and rights to be guaranteed, you know, through public policies and other initiatives that will guarantee, you know, the right to territory, the right to autonomy, to the right to live, you know, in a country such as ours, where people are being, you know, assassinated and threatened just for the fact that they want to live in their territory differently from the capitalist mode of living.
Yeah, and we need those who have caused this crisis that we're in to take responsibility for it.